Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we're going to talk about some players that I personally think are currently going under the radar. The cutoff we've got is under 10% ownership at the time of recording, so hopefully going to spot a few hidden gems for you. If you're enjoying the content here on this channel, please do remember to like, comment and subscribe. But without further ado, let's jump into today's video. So guys, it is worth noting that the very nature of this video is that I'm selecting and suggesting some under the radar differential picks. Because they are differential, it means not a lot of people think they're worth picking at their team, at least at the time of me recording this. So as you're watching, cut me a bit of slack. Of course, like I said, the nature of this video is that you might not necessarily think any of these players are worth selecting, or most likely you'll think that most of them aren't worth selecting. But the whole point of what I try to do on my channel is I like you guys to try and think critically, independently, and make your own decisions. And by doing this, what I'm hopefully doing is breaking up the template a little bit, because it can get a little bit boring when all of the content creators you watch, myself included, all suggest similar players, and all of our drafts look very similar. So hopefully by suggesting a few of these players, it just sparks something in you and makes you maybe start to consider different structures and different players as well. So the first player in today's video that is currently a differential under 5% owned at the time of me recording this is Kai Havertz, and I really think that he could kick on this season. Now, of course, he's been moved from a midfielder to a forward. He's at £8 million. I think that's a really nice price, and the reason I say that is there are other players at that similar price as well. So up at 9 million, you can have Jota or Darwin. At 8, you can have Jesus. Down at 7.5, you can have Wilson, Bamford. At 8, Calvert-Lewin, I know right now doesn't look like great value, but at some point could be. So it's a nice price point to have a player in there. And if Havertz doesn't work out, maybe you have him for game weeks 1 to 3, and it just doesn't look good. He's not playing a lot of games, or he just doesn't look great up top for Chelsea. It's an easy switch to a Havertz, or it's an easy switch even down to like a Tony at 7 million, who have pretty good fixtures from game week 3, Brentford. So I really do like Havertz as an option. I think strikers in general are going under the radar, and I don't think you necessarily need to adhere to that. Just because everyone else is going big at the back, just because last season the strikers weren't good value, does not mean that this season they won't be. And I do really like the opening fixtures for Chelsea, specifically from an offensive perspective. I think Everton, Tottenham, Leeds, Leicester, Southampton and West Ham, that's a really nice opening 6 there, and I expect Chelsea to score goals. When we take a look at Havertz's numbers from last season, they are actually pretty good. He only played just shy of 2,000 minutes, so he didn't play that many minutes, but 61% start percentage is pretty decent. I expect that to kick on this year because they don't have Lukaku. Of course, Lukaku's gone, left Chelsea for this season. Looks like, at the time of me recording this, I'm recording this a couple of days before it goes live, but it looks like Armando Broja apparently might not be going on pre-season tour, but at the very least appears to be pushing for a move, potentially back to Southampton, potentially to Newcastle, and then also West Ham is the main club that has been linked with Broja. So it looks like there could potentially be absolutely no competition for Havertz. We'll have to wait and see if Chelsea do try and push to sign Ronaldo. I've got a feeling potentially that won't happen, but we'll have to wait and see. Let me know down below what you think on that. But assuming they don't sign another striker, competition could be quite low for that position. Expected FPL points last season was 5.43, which is pretty good, especially for someone at that sort of 7.5, £8 million price tag there. So I'd be fairly happy if he can keep up something fairly similar there. And his non-penalty expected goal involvement was 0.5. Now, for £8 million, I'd maybe want to see that increase slightly, maybe pushing towards 0.6, but that's definitely nothing to turn your nose up at, and it's better than a lot of other players that are priced at 0.5 this season. His non-penalty expected goal involvement delta, which basically measures your finishing ability, it takes your actual goals and takes away your non-penalty expected goal involvement, is actually negative 0.01. So what this essentially tells us is that his finishing ability, or the amount of chances that he finished relative to what he was expected to, is about what you'd expect. And then touches in the box is 6.61. He got a lot of touches in the box. At one point last season, this was actually up in the 8s and the 9s. So he's someone that gets involved in the box a lot as well, getting involved in a lot in the action. And if he's going to play through the middle for Chelsea, I expect that to continue, because Chelsea don't play with a false 9. Chelsea play with an out-and-out number 9. So I really like Havertz, I'll be completely honest. I think he's a great option. He's someone that I did put in one of my recent drafts. For me, I'm trying to decide, do I want that £8 million striker? Do I want 7.5? Or do I want to take the value out altogether? If I do go for an 8 million, I definitely think Havertz deserves some consideration alongside Gabriel Jesus. He could be a really nice differential. So guys, the next two players are two cheap midfielders and potential alternatives to the very heavily owned and heavily talked about Pedro Neto. I think Neto's pretty much dividing the community at the moment. I think everyone's either very, very keen on Neto, or they just don't understand it. I don't think there's many people that are like, yeah, Neto's a decent option. So what I thought I would do here is, if you're one of those people that just doesn't see the hype in Neto, just suggest two players to maybe keep your eye on. Now, I absolutely love the look of Crystal Palace this season. Last season, their underlying data was so good, specifically defensively, but also from an attacking perspective as well. I really like the look of Palace going forward, and I think Vieira will continue to improve them. And one player who I've really got my eye on is Michael Olise. Now, the real issue that we've got, and the slight frustration that I have, is that Palace's opening fixtures aren't great. So you can see Arsenal, Liverpool, and City in their first four. However, with a cheap player, you don't need to play them every week. So what you can do with these players is if you went for like a Michael Olise and then a cheap £4.5 million defender, or even like a Neco Williams at Nottingham Forest, if that move does go through, you can almost rotate these players. So you could, I think, play Olise in game week 1. Crystal Palace did well against Arsenal last season. Play him in 3 and play him in 5. So what you would then need, if you wanted to pick someone like Olise, is a cheap defender, forward or midfielder to rotate with him that you could play in game week 2 and game week 4. Even someone like a Buendia as a decent example here. So I don't think you should necessarily, and maybe this is a bit of a tip for you guys, necessarily be put off just because there are some tricky fixtures in a team's opening 5 or 6 games, if you can get away with rotating them. On the other hand, you've got Buendia, who arguably has 4 of the best opening fixtures here. And I think Aston Villa are maybe going slightly under the radar in general. Gerrard had a bit of a mixed bag season last year, but I do think that we will see some improvements in Villa. And I do like the way that their team looks moving forward. So I think those opening 3 games, Bournemouth, Everton, Palace, and even to some extent West Ham and Arsenal, it's not a terrible opening 5 fixtures. The issue I suppose you have with Buendia, probably slightly more so than Olise, is I'm not necessarily sure that he's going to get into the starting 11 straight away. They can play Danny Ings in Buendia's position. They've obviously got Coutinho as well. We'll have to wait and see in pre-season how they line up. But if we get any inclination that Buendia is starting, and he looks like he's going to start those opening few games, he could be a really nice option. Now, if we compare the underlying statistics for the two, they do play in different positions, right? They're both listed as midfielders. Olise plays off the right, as you can see very clearly on that touch map there. Buendia will play quite centrally, almost like as a number 10. That being said, he can be pushed out to the wing as well if needed, especially if Coutinho is occupying the central spaces. Minutes last season, Olise didn't play a lot. You can actually see start percentage was only 39%. I see that changing this year. I think he's going to get the majority of starts. But if you are a Palace fan, let me know down below if you think Olise is nailed. I guess with all of these cheaper players, even Neto to some extent, even Martinelli, who's another popular one, I don't think you're very likely to get a player with good underlying stats that's also a nailed starter, because they wouldn't be cheap if they were those two things. Expected FPL points per 90. Olise's was very good at 5.78. Buendia's not so good at 4.71, but for the price, I'd actually say both are fairly good. When you compare them, as we just did with Kai Havertz as well, they're putting up a decent showing here. Non-penalty expected goal involvement, 0.36 for Buendia, which is definitely very good for 6. Michael Olise at 0.42. Now, what I would say about this is that a lot of this is made up through expected assists. If you're not interested in stats, essentially, Olise is a very creative player. He's going to create a lot of opportunities for his team. He didn't get in that many goal-scoring opportunities. For their non-penalty expected goal involvement delta, they both overperform their underlying statistics slightly by 0 plus 0.1, which is what you really want. You want a player to overperform slightly, but not too much, because then they might start to regress. And then touches in the box, almost identical. They're both getting around 3.4 touches in the box per 90. So I don't think either of these blow me away, and I'll be honest, I still prefer Neto, and it might be worth taking a risk on someone like Martinelli instead. But if you're not convinced by either of those, and maybe you see this spot as, listen, if you're going to go for a fairly template team elsewhere, maybe the 5.5/6 million midfield spot is a place you can take a slight risk. I don't mind Michael Olise and Buendia. Olise in particular really interests me. It's just a bit of a shame they don't have slightly better opening fixtures. So we're going to stick with some cheap players that, in my opinion, are currently going under the radar, less than 10% at the time of me recording this for ownership. And this is 2 Nottingham Forest players. If you're a Forest fan, do let me know down below. Very exciting season for you, I'm sure. And they're both the £6 million strikers. We've got Brennan Johnson and Taiwo Awoniyi. I'm very sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Someone told me in the stream I did. I'm trying to learn. Let me know down below the phonetic sort of pronunciation if I am mispronouncing that. But I think they both could be excellent value at £6 million. In particular, Taiwo Awoniyi is the one that I'm really looking at here. Just joined from Union Berlin. He actually came through the Liverpool youth system, apparently. I've been trying to get to know sort of his underlying data, his sort of history to date as well. Looks like a serious talent, but I think both of these could be excellent options. Now, you can see we've got slightly different statistics here. This is taken from sort of Infogol, FBref. I've had to take this from a few different places here because we don't have easy access to some of the underlying data in different leagues. Specifically the Championship, it can be quite tricky to get. For the opening fixtures for Nottingham Forest, they definitely have the best opening fixtures of the newly promoted team. So Fulham and Bournemouth have much worse fixtures, in my opinion, than Forest. the colour scheme, the colour FDR rating, I should say, makes it look like their fixtures are potentially worse than they are. I don't think Newcastle, West Ham, Everton are a particularly tricky opening 3. Of course, Tottenham and City are pretty tricky in 4 and 5. But as I said in the last section, you don't necessarily need to play these players every week if you've got another sort of £4.5 million defender you can rotate with. So each week you can bench one of them as an example. With respect to which one to choose, let's go through the underlying data from last season, have a bit of a discussion of them. So Brennan Johnson played a ridiculous 4,400 minutes last season, which was double Taiwo Awoniyi there. A lot of minutes, but obviously he's never going to play that many minutes this season due to the amount of games that you play in the Championship. With respect to output, both very impressive. 28 attacking contributions for Brennan Johnson, but of course, quite a few minutes to get that. Whereas Taiwo Awoniyi got 16 contributions in less than half the time there. So if you were to double that, you'd be looking at potentially sort of 32, 33 contributions in a similar amount of minutes. So both of them, very, very good output. But of course, it is a different ball game in the Premier League, as we do know. Expected goals, Brennan Johnson, for £6 million, a very respectable 0.28. Taiwo Awoniyi coming in at 0.58 expected goals. Now, both of these players did take penalties last year. It will be very interesting to see who does take penalties for Forest. Let me know down below if you've got a bit of an idea about who will be taking penalties for Forest next, or this season, I should say. But both of them still have pretty decent non-penalty expected goal involvement as well. And then expected assists, you can see that Brennan Johnson is the slightly more creative player. This is because that he's not always an actual number 9. So if you look at their touch maps, Taiwo Awoniyi is pretty much all the time dead through the centre, whereas Brennan Johnson a lot of the time does play off the right. Now, I'm going to be having a discussion with Mark Southerns very soon in an upcoming video, and of course, he will be talking about it in various different podcasts as well. He's probably the #1 go-to Forest fan at the moment. He has a feeling that he could be sort of a negative out of position player. So Brennan Johnson, whilst listed as a forward, may be lining up on the wing, or even if he's lining up in a front 2, he does tend to drift out a little bit wide again, as you can see by the touch map there. So maybe Taiwo Awoniyi is the one to go for because he's the one that's most likely to be playing through the middle, potentially. Let me know your thoughts down below, as I said. Shots per 90. Brennan Johnson actually takes a lot more shots at 4.38 compared to Awoniyi's 2.73. So I don't necessarily think that we should take too many things from this, but it might suggest that Brennan Johnson's going to take a hell of a lot of shots in the Premier League, and that can lead to like FPL assists. So of course, FPL assists wouldn't be listed here. If he gets a lot of rebounded shots, etc., that could lead to potentially more assists than we can even see here. And then their info goal rating, just to give you a bit of an idea about their general performances, both above 7, Brennan Johnson at 7.08 and Taiwo Awoniyi at 7.3. So these look like two very exciting players, and two players that I'm not seeing in a lot of drafts. And I think a lot of people don't want to invest very heavily in the forwards, and I absolutely understand that. And to be honest, I'm sort of on board with it as well. So if you only want to go with one premium forward and then maybe one cheaper one, Undav is very popular at the moment, and I do think he's an excellent option. Of course, he's above 10% at the time of me recording this, so I couldn't include him in this video. But if you don't want to go with Undav, maybe just try one of these guys out. Like I said, as long as you can rotate them for those fixtures that are tricky, I think they could be decent options. Let me know down below if you are considering either of the Nottingham Forest strikers, and if you are, which one you're currently looking at. Let's move on to the next two players. So guys, it appears early on in the season at least, not many people are interested in Pep Roulette this year. A lot of people, over 60% at the time of recording, have opted for Erling Haaland. Outside of that, no one's particularly interested in any of the other Manchester City attackers. I think De Bruyne is well over 10% as well, as a decent alternative to Haaland if you want a City premium attacker. But all of the other City attackers are currently under 10%. A lot of people are just opting to go without them. They don't want the headache, and I don't necessarily blame you. So at the time of recording this, Foden is currently the highest owned. He's sort of flirting with that 10% boundary. So I thought I would go with Grealish and Mahrez here. But I think all three of them really could offer excellent value. Now, the reason that I think maybe even more so than usual they could be excellent choices is purely just due to the fact that Man City have already sold Jesus. At the time of me recording this, it looks like Sterling's gone to Chelsea. So that's two less players to compete with, and it doesn't look like City are signing any replacements. So if you think that some of these players got a decent amount of game time anyway last season, surely that game time's only going to improve now. So I really think if we can try and from pre-season, and it's difficult to try and do this, gather some intel as to who is Pep's favoured starting two wingers alongside Haaland through the middle, it could be absolute goldmine early on, especially with the fixtures that City have got. I'll be honest, I don't know at the moment who I think is going to be starting for City. What I would say, and I've said this before, it's one of the reasons I do like Foden, is you do need to remember that Pep likes to play quite a high-pressing team. It's not quite as high-pressing necessarily as the likes of Liverpool, or at least not as intense as Liverpool, but he does like to press quite high up the pitch. He said before that City's defenders aren't actually that excellent. The team just works very well and very cohesively. I think personally, if you have Haaland and Mahrez and Grealish, if you think about that front three in comparison to potentially something like Jesus, Sterling, and De Bruyne, which was a front three we would have seen quite a few times last season, that is a real step down in how much pressing and how much intensity Pep will get from them. So I expect Foden to start the majority of games. Therefore, you're probably looking at Grealish and Mahrez competing, maybe with Palmer, maybe with Alvarez, can play on the wing. So maybe there's a little bit more competition than we think. I just still think that both of these players should get a fair amount of game time early on. Let me know down below what you think City's sort of starting front three will be. Fixtures, like I said, are absolutely fantastic. To play Bournemouth and Forest in the opening five is great. And the other fixtures, West Ham, Newcastle and Palace, to be honest, it doesn't really matter what City's fixtures are, but to also have good fixtures is really, really nice too. When we compare the underlying statistics of Grealish and Mahrez, they're both very good and they're actually fairly comparable. Considering that Grealish is £1 million cheaper, maybe you start to look there. So start percentage, Grealish actually started 63% of games when he was fully fit. So this actually surprised me. This was fairly similar to Foden, much higher than Mahrez, similar to Jesus. So Grealish was actually one of Pep's favoured starting players. The reason he didn't play more minutes is because he did pick up a couple of injuries during the season. And I think, therefore, that considering how well he finished the season, looking at this start percentage, maybe Grealish is going to get significantly more football next year, assuming he can stay fit. Expected FPL points, Mahrez is absolutely fantastic at 7.3 to Grealish's 5.06. Now, the reason for that is Mahrez had 4 or 5 penalties, I believe. He had quite a few penalties to take, and that boosts up your expected FPL points. So when we look at their non-penalty expected goal involvement, removing penalties from the equation, it's fairly comparable for Grealish and Mahrez. 0.55 for Mahrez, 0.49 for Grealish. Remember that Havertz was at 0.5. So both of these are sort of similar to what we can see with Havertz. If you look at penalties if you add penalties into the equation as well, Mahrez shoots up above 0.7. So maybe when you're looking at Mahrez's data, looking at how many returns he got, maybe just take into consideration the fact that that was with penalties. And at the time of me recording this, I think the general consensus is we don't necessarily expect Mahrez to keep penalties. We're probably expecting Haaland to take them. If that is the case, maybe Mahrez isn't the player that we necessarily think he is. And I'll be honest, Foden's data is better than both Grealish and Mahrez. So if you're not necessarily as interested in getting an ultra differential, maybe we just go for Foden. Non-penalty expected goal involvement delta. You can see Grealish massively underperformed these non-penalty expected goal involvement delta at negative 0.21. So that might suggest he was unlucky. It might suggest some poor finishing from him or poor finishing from his fellow teammates, whereas Mahrez slightly overperformed his expected goal involvement. And then touches in the box, both exceptional, just above 8. You can see by their touch maps, it's very easy for Grealish and Mahrez to play together from an attacking perspective. Like I said, I do just wonder, let me know down below if you agree with me, whether Grealish, Haaland and Mahrez, is that going to work from a pressing perspective? Or would it potentially be better to get like a Foden in there? Because Foden's work rate is second to none. Very, very interested to hear your thoughts on the City midfielders. At the moment, I would probably say just about Foden, Grealish, Mahrez. But do let me know down below how you would rate those 3 players. I know, everyone hates the forwards in FPL this season and they think they're massively overpriced. But hear me out, maybe they're not. Maybe they could potentially be decent options. So the 2 that I've listed here are Callum Wilson and Patrick Bamford, just because they are 2 £7.5 million forwards. I could have had Watkins in here. At the time of recording, Watkins is actually slightly higher than these 2 for ownership. And I do think they'll probably, just due to his opening fixtures, probably shoot just above 10%. So I've stuck with Wilson and Bamford now. And you might be surprised to see Wilson in a differential video because he's been talked about a lot in the community. I've owned him in several of my drafts. But despite everyone talking about Wilson, not many managers are actually owning Wilson at the moment. And I think the reason for that isn't necessarily due to Wilson. It's just that they don't really want forwards. I'm seeing a lot of just one premium forward and then nothing else. Or even if they don't have a premium forward, a lot of people going for just Gabriel Jesus. So I think a lot of the Wilsons, Bamfords, Tonys, Watkins, etc. of FPL, I think they will go under the radar and they'll probably continue to be under 10% ownership going into game week 1 as well. When we compare the 2 of them, both decent opening fixtures, actually, specifically the first 2 for both teams. I don't mind it. Forest and Brighton for Newcastle, Wolves and Southampton for Leeds. They've both got a tricky fixture in their game week 3, and then also for game week 5, Wilson has a tricky fixture too. So maybe just have a think about, if you do go for Wilson, who can you rotate into your team for 3 and 5? Or are you maybe just looking to sell him in game week 5, potentially for another player such as an Ivan Toney? That could be a decent option. I do think that they could have got away with pricing the forwards maybe £1 million less at 6.5 or even at 7. but their underlying data is not much worse than the likes of a Mahrez, than a Foden, and we're so happy to pay £8 million for these players. So potentially, are we maybe being slightly biased towards the midfielders? Let me know what you think down below. Neither of these players played a lot of minutes last season, right? They were both quite injury prone. Bamford in particular just could not get a run of games together. So maybe take these underlying stats with a slight pinch of salt. But you can see both of them start the majority of games when they're in their team. Both getting above 4.5 expected FPL points per 90, which is pretty good for a striker, considering the fact that they get one less point for a goal and they don't get the expected FPL point for a clean sheet as well. Non-penalty expected goal involvement. Wilson's was actually slightly disappointing last season. It's obviously boosted up his actual returns because he's on penalties. And assuming that Rafinha does leave, even if he doesn't, we assume that Bamford will probably be on penalties as well. So their numbers will be boosted even further than this. But you can see Bamford's non-penalty expected goal involvement was 0.52. And the season before that, when he had his incredible 200-point plus season, or I think it was just less than 200 points, wasn't it? About 190 points. It was even better than that, his underlying data. So Bamford is a player that when he plays, he will probably maintain above a 0.5 non-penalty expected goal involvement. Like I said, that's better than Havertz. That's better than Grealish. That's approaching Mahrez and Foden as well. So maybe we're not giving the likes of Bamford enough credit. Now, I know what people will say, without Rafinha, Leeds might potentially struggle, but Leeds have made several really promising signings, which we might discuss in future videos. I think Bamford could be a decent shout. I think Wilson could be, even to some extent at some point, Calvert-Lewin. I genuinely think we've got a little bit of recency bias here with respect to forwards aren't good value, when apart from last season, forwards have actually been brilliant value. In the previous seasons, forwards have been some of the highest scoring players. So I think at various points this season, the likes of Tony Wilson, Bamford, Calvert-Lewin, whoever it may be, I genuinely do believe they will be good value. And in particular, I'm actually looking at Bamford here, and the reason is it's almost like a bit of a stubborn thing that I'm seeing. So I've seen like 2 or 3 other FPL content creators, absolutely no disregard to their videos, they were excellent, put Bamford as an avoid player. And I understand why. Very injury prone. We're not sure how Leeds will be without Rafinha. But the underlying data is certainly not bad enough for me to say he's an avoid. It might be that a wait and see. It's definitely not a void for me. And even Wilson, that underlying data was relatively poor last year. I'd expect it to return to his sort of baseline of, again, around 0.5. So let me know down below what you think of that. Both of them overperformed their expected goal involvement last year, or their non-penalty expected goal involvement. And both players were getting over 5 touches in the box per 90 as well. So you've got 2 very, very sort of classic number 9s, 2 players that are probably going to be on penalties, 2 players that will start all of the games really available to them when they are fully fit. I like them both as options. I also like Watkins probably as the third 7.5. I don't mind Tony either. Let me know down below. Are you still disregarding strikers? If so, do you think maybe it's a bit of recency bias? Or do you just genuinely think that the midfielders are better options? Always interested to hear your thoughts down below. So guys, I'm actually recording this on the Friday for a Monday release, because at the time of you watching this, I'm currently in Italy at an academic conference presenting some of my research for my PhD. So I've had to record this just a few days in advance. So massive apologies if for some reason the Raheem Sterling to Chelsea move suddenly falls through. I do apologise, but it looks almost dead cert to happen. Looks like the fee in personal terms have been agreed. If that does happen, in my personal opinion, we've got a serious option here with Sterling at 10 million. Now, I know you can just get Mason Mount for 8 million. Potentially, even if like Rafinha moves, you've got Rafinha at 7 million. You do have some other options for quite a bit cheaper, but Raheem Sterling always puts up very, very, very good underlying data. And considering the fact that they're going to be paying quite a bit for him, and he wouldn't have moved from City to on the bench to then play for Chelsea on the bench. I'm assuming he's moving because he thinks he's getting a starting position. I genuinely think he could be a serious option from game week 1. Now, the other reason I like this is because, in my personal opinion, I've probably seen maybe only 1% of teams that have a player at the price point between 9 million and 10 million. Think to yourself now, the latest drafts you've built, or any of the drafts you've built, have you had any players between 9 and 10 million? I don't think many will. Some will have the premium players, and then a lot of people will have maybe a couple of premiums, and then 8 million is maybe the second most expensive, something like a Saka, Mason Mount, Foden, etc. What that does is it makes it very difficult for most managers to get Bruno, Raheem Sterling, Jota, Darwin, Vardy. They're the 5 players in particular that I'm thinking about there. And all of those could be either very early on or at some point in the season, maybe before your first wildcard, really nice options. So starting with a £10 million player, what that allows you to do is it allows you to get to those 5 players, or if for some reason I'm wrong and you're wrong and those 5 players don't do well, it's a very easy downgrade to an £8 million player, such as a Mason Mount, and then you've got 2 million in the bank to play with. So I really think there's almost nothing to lose by going for a 10 million, other than you, of course, at the start have 2 million less to use on your team. So it will mean you'll probably have to make 1 extra downgrade. So that's my opinion. That's why I like the 10 millions. And I do think that both Raheem Sterling and Bruno Fernandes, for different reasons, could offer excellent value. We've spoken about Chelsea's fixtures. United's fixtures really aren't as bad as they potentially looked when they first came out. Brighton is not an easy game. We saw that last year. We got battered I'm a Manchester United fan. We lost 4-0. It could quite easily be a similar situation here, but I don't expect Ten Hag to go out and put out a performance like that personally. So it's probably going to be a little bit tighter, maybe not that many goals, but Brentford and Southampton aren't bad. Liverpool, anything can happen in a derby like that. Again, I expect us to probably get battered, but you've got Bruno Fernandes there to get attacking returns. If Manchester United lose 4-2 and Bruno gets 2 attacking returns, who cares, right? I care, but not from an FPL perspective, you wouldn't. And then Leicester away, whilst it is a red fixture, Leicester from last year didn't defend particularly well, so that could be an okay fixture. So I don't think the fixtures are bad for Chelsea or United, and like I said, I do like that £10 million price point. When we look at their data from last season, of course, Sterling you need to take with a pinch of salt because he's going to be playing in a different system under a different team. But 61% of starts wasn't bad for Sterling. Now, I expect that to probably push up towards maybe 70-75% at Chelsea if he does make the move. Bruno Fernandes started 92% of games. I expect him to continue to start pretty much every game available for Manchester United. The interesting thing with Bruno is where is he going to play? If Man United do sign Eriksen, does Bruno play through the middle and Eriksen on the bench? Does Eriksen play on the right? Does Bruno play on the right? I know a lot of people maybe smirk at that, but Tadic played that position very, very well for Ajax, just off the right for Ajax. Maybe Bruno could fulfill a similar position. And if Ronaldo does leave, potentially if he goes to Chelsea or if he does leave Manchester United, Bruno could even play as a false 9. So I think regardless of whether he's a number 10, he plays off the right, or he plays as a false 9, Bruno really is an excellent option. He always puts up pretty good data. You can see their expected FPL points last season, 6.77 for Sterling, 5.07 for Bruno Fernandes. Excellent stats there for Sterling. And that continues with the non-penalty expected goal involvement of 0.66. Remember, we've spoken about Grealish at 0.49, Mahrez at 0.55, Havertz at 0.5. Sterling is beating all of them. He's beating Bruno Fernandes as well. So he probably justifies the £10 million price tag if he can continue to put up similar underlying data at Chelsea. Non-penalty expected goal involvement, delta, is negative 0.03 for both. So both about neutral, about what you would expect from most players there. And touches in the box per 90. This is a ridiculous difference here. 9.01 touch in the box per 90 for Sterling. He is a player that gets very involved in the action. That's why his data is so good as well. Bruno Fernandes only 2.97 in the box per 90, which is slightly disappointing, slightly lower than the season before. I would expect that to increase slightly more now under Erik ten Hag. Again, I do assume that he's going to play a slightly more advanced role. Regardless of what position he plays, I think he'll play slightly more advanced this season. So just to say, I really like this price point. Even if you want to go for a Jamie Vardy at 9.5, I don't mind it. But of course, that would then still make it difficult to get Sterling and Bruno Fernandes in as well. So maybe start with one of these. Maybe consider it. I wouldn't probably go for one premium and then Sterling or Fernandes. I'd still probably try and squeeze 2 premiums in and then go for a Sterling or Fernandes in addition. So what I would call that is a 2.5 premium draft. I don't mind them. It just means you have to try and find that extra 2 million from somewhere. Let me know down below if Sterling at Chelsea or just Bruno Fernandes, maybe with the absence of Ronaldo, would be interesting to you for Game Week 1. So guys, there you have it. Those are 11, a bit of a random number, 11 differentials that I think are potentially going under the radar. Like I said, you might not want to include all of them. I'm not even necessarily saying you should include or even consider all of them, but like I said, the point of this video is to try and spark some creative thought and some critical thinking and maybe start to make you think about some different price points and different players as well. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel, please do try and support by subscribing, liking and commenting. We are trying to hit 20,000 subscribers before the start of the season, so if you're someone that's still watched the entire video and you've not yet subscribed, please do consider doing so. Until next time guys, thank you so much for watching. Cheers. Bye bye.